What's the nature of your emergency?
Welcome back to the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Wilton, joined by Sergeant Wilton. Clint, how are you?
I'm good.
I was recently sharing with you how lucky you and I both were to have been raised in such a solid and stable household with folks that were married to each other for a very long time and who just poured so much love and support into us. And in today's episode, I wanted to talk about the unspoken pressure of being the tough one in your family. And I think this is an important thing to talk about because I've never heard it mentioned before, and I wanted to shed some light on it. And in this episode, when I was writing the show notes, I was thinking about the fact that my dad was so tough growing up. When I was growing up, my mom, her dream in life was to be a mom. And my dad afforded her the opportunity to be a stay-at-home mom, which was an incredibly difficult task for her. Having so many brothers, they definitely did not make life any easier for her. And I was thinking about how there were times when my dad didn't work for himself, as he later did in life, and he would have to go to these trade shows down in Los Angeles. So he would be gone and stay in a hotel over the weekend. And I remember how empty and even scared I felt when he wasn't at home. And it's very interesting when I'm reflecting back on things now, because my dad, we never had firearms in the house. And we didn't need it. My dad was the tough one, right? I had an incident where a gentleman exposed himself to me in a public bathroom at a market one time. And I just remember my dad, the manager called my dad. My dad rushed over there and literally beat the shit out of the guy to where the manager had to say, Mike, you're going to kill him and end up in prison if you don't stop. And so all to say, my dad didn't need guns, right? He was the tough one. And what a lot of pressure that must have been on him to be the one who was working to support and feed his family, but then to also be the protector of an entire household of a wife and, a house full of kids.
Yeah, and it's a dynamic that we don't often think of, like growing up in my household. I remember, if my dad had to work graveyard on overtime or something, or he didn't get home till late at night, there's a sense of security that you didn't have, especially as a kid. You're scared that someone's going to break into the house, or you're scared something may happen when dad's not home, because my dad created that dynamic in our household to give you that sense of security, because then he gets home and you're okay, we're safe. And you didn't have to worry about it from that point on. And it's not that my mom couldn't have done something, but she wouldn't have done something. So it's you having that understanding and that appreciation for that. And it's because it's one of those things that you don't think of very often.
As this relates to first responders, you're often seen as these problem solvers, these fixers, these protectors, not only in your family, but you are that problem solver, fixer, and protector for your entire community. And sometimes you take on that burden and that responsibility for the people that might work underneath you as well.
Yeah, having that dynamic of... I tell this to my guys all the time, I'm here to look after you, to one, make sure you don't do anything stupid, because we are our own worst enemies most of the time, but two, to make sure you have the knowledge and the know-how, how you can make sure that you're going home safely every day.
Sometimes this can create an element of this unspoken pressure. So one of these being that you can handle everyone else's problems, but sometimes not your own.
Yeah, and if you're handling everyone else's problems, but then you go home and you have this negative environment that you're harboring and you're creating because you're emotionally unattached to whatever else it may be, because you're doing this on a regular basis, you're building up those barriers in your home life because it's something that you're just over making those decisions for the day.
I think a lot of the times too, somebody in this tough situation might not understand that it's okay if you've always been that person to change your mind and to create some boundaries. I'm thinking about an individual who we recently had a conversation, and he was telling me that my daughter, she went to go get braces and she's really needed them for a long time, and she gets done getting them and then she calls me and says, oh, well, it's going to be really hard for me to afford these. And so he said, oh, don't worry about it, I'll pay for them. And in my mind, I'm like, fairly certain she's 27, fairly certain she's married, fairly certain that there are plans that you can get, right, if you need to do a monthly payment. And, I'm pointing this out because this is common behavior that I've seen. This is the type of thing that is going to increase some sort of financial pressure on you, that is also creating a continued unhealthy dynamic in that family relationship. In my opinion, and Clinton, I have vented to you about this a great deal because I see it over and over again. We have somebody in our family that, actually we have several someones in our family where we see this financial burden take place on repeat. And it takes place on repeat because they're being enabled, right? If you're 27 and you're married and you want to get braces and your daddy is going to pay for it for you, there's a problem with that.
Yeah, you have to create that line somewhere, because how long are you going to still, I understand they're your kids, you want to take care of them, but there's a difference between taking care of your kid and having them take care of themselves. Because if they always can fall on you for the luxury items in life, they're never going to prioritize that stuff for them.
Yeah, and it's also not teaching them financial responsibility and then creating that kind of tough guy situation to where you have to take that on as well, right? And if you are that person, like obviously if you're the one that people are going to for that sort of thing, you're probably also the one that they're calling at 2:00 in the morning because, something happened. Maybe they could have called their husband instead. They're calling you at making an inconvenience instead of trying to figure things out on their own. And that just creates this very unhealthy cycle, especially as people get older.
Yeah, you need to have that healthy relationship, and the more and more you do it, the harder. Say right now you can afford those braces, and that's okay. But now 6 months from now, there's something else that comes up and you can't afford it. Now you turn into the bad guy in their mind because you're not taking care of them anymore.
Yeah. And, something happened, Clint. We've been married for so long now that it's very interesting to be able to see this change. But when you and I got married, like we were out on our own. It wasn't, not to say that I couldn't have gone back home if but somebody of our age, when we got married, like once you're married, you create your own problems, you create your own solutions, you create your own entity in life. And it's no longer a byproduct and a weight on. That's why you hear like, okay, well, now we're empty nesters and our kids are out of the house. And, soon we're not going to hear that anymore because like there's still going to be this codependency that exists. But with you and I, like once we were out, like we never got or asked for anything from our folks. It was just, okay, we figure it out on our own. And if that meant that we couldn't afford cable or, it didn't make sense to put that into our budget, then we didn't have cable, right? Like we learned sacrifice, we learned discipline. That's how we learn financial responsibility. And we also learned a lot from each other in creating that foundation together.
Yeah, having those conversations, being able to problem solve and diagnose amongst you and your spouse it's key for not only a healthy relationship, but it's to grow up. And I think that's one of the biggest things, and this just came to me, is people aren't growing up anymore because they're being treated like children their whole lives.
Yeah. And, this could be a portion of their lives is still being funded by their parents, or I have a problem and they're making the parents handle it instead of them taking care of it, or even parents making phone calls to insurance companies for the kid, like whatever the thing is, like let them go.
Yeah.
And, people might argue that, well, you're parents and you don't understand. I hear that all the fucking time. But guess what? It's because I'm not a parent that I can see things that, in my opinion, are unhealthy in terms of the relationships.
So let me ask you this. When's the last time you heard like, oh, well, you're turning 18 soon, so you need to get out of the house?
Yeah. No, they want like co-house, like co-homes, co-families.
Yeah, you don't hear it anymore. Like growing up for us, like 18 years old, you were out. Did that mean we were getting kicked out? No, absolutely not.
Well, I believe my parents prayed every night that I wouldn't ever leave.
No, I know. But
maybe they prayed the opposite for the boys, but not for me.
And it's knowing that and seeing that is like, I have family members who they didn't start driving until their mid-20s. Like, to me, that when I was 15 and a half, I'm like, okay, can I go drive now? Like, it's that freedom. It's that sense of growing up that it's just not there anymore.
Yeah, and I want to wrap this episode up by saying, like, this isn't shit talking. This is just like pointing out facts that if it feels like shit talking, it's probably because it might be applicable to you. And I would encourage you to just actualize what these concepts are. And a lot of the times, like, the bottom line is, if you're that go-to person that people are just taking and taking and taking from, then it does not create an environment where it's ever okay for you to ask for help. And that in and of itself can not only be something that's unhealthy, but it can be very dangerous. I hope you've gotten some value out of today's episode. If you have, do us a favor, drop a review, subscribe down below. And as always, know that I'm sending you a long, tight hug from my home to yours.